So here we are on the rooftops of the old city of Jerusalem, and the sun is rising, and we have come to that point in biblical history where we look at how David ushers in a golden age for Israel. But how did we get here from the end of the Judges, where the cycle of the human condition had deteriorated so much that the practices of the tribes of the nation of Israel were almost worse than the neighbouring tribes around them? Those tribes wanted a king, a human king. They'd seen that the nations around them had a human king, and they wanted to be like the nations around them. God himself said he would be their king. He'd promised those covenant blessings when he delivered the Torah, the law at Sinai, that he would bring protection, provision and identity. But that wasn't sufficient for the tribes of Israel. They wanted a human king like the nations around them. So finally, God works with them. He says, if you do have a human king, they will make you slaves and make you pay taxes. But if that's what you want, I will give you what you want. And the last judge or prophet or deliverer, called Samuel, he calls to anoint the first king of Israel, a man called Saul. Saul reigns for about 40 years, but his son Jonathan, interestingly, doesn't become king. The kingdom is passed on to another man called David. And he reigns over Jerusalem. Initially, he establishes Jerusalem for the first time as the capital city of the tribe of Judah, and then for 7 years, and then 33 years for the whole nation of Israel, making his career as king as well, 40 years. And then he has many sons, but one son, Solomon, becomes the next king, and he reigns for 40 years. To pick up why David particularly ushered in a golden age, we need to look at the different characters between Saul and David. And for us as followers of Jesus, these in many ways illustrate the differences between our old nature, who we are born into and in fundamental severance from God, and our new nature, created in intimacy in Christ with God. And Saul and David really symbolise or paint a picture of what it looks like to walk in those two ways. So they're both called by God to reign, but Saul runs and hides with the donkeys. He wrestles with this insignificance his whole life, and it becomes a character flaw. Whereas David, he's discovered amongst the sheep. His brothers don't even remember who he is. He's the eighth of a line of sons, and he's out looking after the sheep as a teenager. But when Samuel anoints him as king, it's like he just knows that's who he is and that's what he's designed to be. And our old nature often resists the call to reign with God and to recover that leadership that we were given at Eden. But our new nature knows that's who we are. That's what humanity is designed to do. Lead in a way that releases others and all those within our jurisdiction to greatness. Then the second way that David and Saul in some ways illustrate are two ways to live. Saul wasn't wholehearted in his approach to God. He couldn't quite do everything God asked him to do. He still was colluding with that myth of independence, that he had the knowledge of good and evil. Whereas David at every stage would ask God, how can this battle be fought? What are the next steps here? And he restored something of that vision in Eden, to have intimacy with God and live out of that place, and that to be his life source. And then finally, at the end of their lives, you see Saul had to build a monument to himself. He couldn't quite rid himself from that insignificance, and so had to make something so that other people at least would believe there was something significant about him. Whereas David knew his significance, he didn't need to do that, and actually he ended his life desperate to have a temple built for God himself, that God's presence, Yahweh, would be hosted in Jerusalem. A wish that his son Solomon fulfilled when he spent 7 years building that very first temple in Jerusalem. And it was through his spirit that a golden age of Israel was ushered in. He was successful in all his military battles. He was the covenant king that represented God well and provided protection, provision and identity for the people. His son Solomon, in a sense, was the climax of that era. His name, the root shalom, meant he was a man of peace, and he had the largest expansion of his borders and peace around his borders for his entire reign. And nations, famously the Queen of Sheba, but leaders of nations would come and pay homage to Solomon because his wisdom was renowned across the ancient Near Middle East. And although David was great, and it was his humanity and that life and intimacy and connectedness with God which was recovering something of Eden, something that had been lost when humanity was severed from Eden. He was still human, and he tragically commits adultery with one of his best friends, one of his mighty warriors' wives, and violates 5 of the 10 commandments in that one incident. He lies, he steals, he commits adultery, he covets initially, and he murders. And we see at the end of Solomon's life, he marries many wives and has many concubines, and his heart turns away to worship the gods of his wives and concubines. So maybe David and Solomon represent for us as readers a heartache, a yearning, a desire for an anointed one, a Mashiach, a Messiah, who will actually usher in not just a golden age for a group of people in a particular area, but a golden age for a whole new, true, full, healed, restored humanity. A golden age of humanity.